Hello, Sam Parrish, and welcome to this week's Quick Things, which is just a few quick announcements and then a conversation about a very wonderful topic in a very important week for some of us anyway, and really for all of us, I would hope, as Christians and as Catholics. So first of all, Stations of the Cross at 5 p.m. on Friday. Our plan would be to be inside this week. So, and in fact, this is the week that we welcome the folks from First English Lutheran. They will be joining us for Stations of the Cross. So all the more reason to gather and welcome them and introduce these folks who are not that familiar with Stations of the Cross. So we're introducing them to a new experience. That's at 5 p.m., 5:15 on Friday in McKillop Hall, and then reconciliation from 5 to 6 on Wednesday and 9 p.m. on Saturday. And of course, most importantly, during Lent, as always, our Lord's Day liturgies. We are under construction in church, but we're having great celebrations in McKillop Hall at the usual time. So please plan to join us, especially if you haven't had an opportunity to do that over the past few weeks. So I'm happy to welcome for our conversation today, Greg Lynn. I know Greg just casually through our common membership on the Viterbo University Board of Directors. Greg is there because he's a prestigious alum of Viterbo. I'm not sure why I'm there at all, but it's a privilege to share on the board and to spend a few days a year with Greg and some other great people. But we are here not to talk about Greg or really Viterbo, but to talk about another prestigious Viterbo alum. Maybe Viterbo University in La Crosse, maybe their most prestigious alum, and that is Sister Theo Bulman. This week is Sister Theo Bulman week at Viterbo University, and so our conversation is timed to coincide with that. Greg will be on campus for all this week, right, Greg? And then
yes.
I'll be down there on Wednesday night for the dedication of the Sister Theo Bulman Center. So I want to talk about Sister Thea from someone who knew her well and still looks to her as a great inspiration and kind of a mentor, even though she has been deceased for how many years has it been since she passed?
1990.
Yeah. So first of all, Greg, where are you from originally?
Originally, I was born in Minneapolis, lived in La Crosse for my young adulthood, then chased graduate degrees in University of Missouri and University of Kansas, and then moved out to Seattle in 1987.
Okay, and that's where you've been since. And that's where you are now as you're talking to us.
Yes.
Do you recall the first time you met Sister Theo Bulman?
Yes, but I first have to respond to you, including other religions with Stations of the Cross. Thea would have loved that because she was so inclusive of different cultures and et cetera, while she recognized her own Black self, but she would just be pleased to see that you're doing that to include other religions too.
Well, you know, when Pope or St. John Paul II introduced these scriptural Stations of the Cross, so he adapted them and made them more scripturally based. I think that might have been part of what he was thinking, or whoever guided him in that it didn't have to be something that separated us, but that's something that we could worship or pray together. So that's great to hear.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
I first was a student at Viterbo from 71 through 76 and needed to get an English credit going. So I was looking through the booklet, et cetera, and here was a course that was being taught was Black literature. Well, you know, being from La Crosse in the 50s and 60s, there was no diversity there without, much sense at all. So I thought that would be very interesting and went into the class. And as weird as it seems, I remember Sister Thea walking in and just having this light around her. I was, 20-year-old kid, and it just said, whoa, something's happening here. And then all she did was to open up her mouth and she got me. And I took 2 courses from her, graduate, and couldn't have been happier as far as what I learned, not only about Eudora Welty and Langston Hughes and other Southern writers, but actually Black writers of the time was was not something that I was privy to, because that
Sure.
was not what was professed. So
In terms of diversity, I mean, the way some people talk about it, she almost was the diversity of lacrosse in some way. I mean, there were other Black people living in lacrosse, but
and I, even in 1972, I don't remember seeing any other Black people in lacrosse. Till this course, what was one of the courses that she brought up her students from Canton, Mississippi. So we had classes together, and it wasn't as much overt discuss about racism, but it was just talking about that implicit bias that we have in ourselves, though those words weren't used back then. But I mean, I remember her, having us be honest about our feelings, and what she was celebrated being Black, and that was not something I was used to. And so that diversity just made me want to learn more, and as I have told everyone, it changed my life, so it just changed the direction with just her being in my life. So
well, and just to put a historical perspective on it, we kind of think of the Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd situation, how that has created this intense environment here now, but that was a very tenuous time in terms of race relations as well. Martin Luther King's assassination and riots in various cities and things. And we were still struggling with some of the basic civil rights issues almost at that time. Can you share a little bit of the story? So what brought Sister Thea to lacrosse?
Well, she was this youth in Canton, Mississippi, and told her parents, who were Methodists, that she wanted to be a Catholic nun, because the FSPA had a base there in Canton, Mississippi with education. And of course, her folks, with their own biases, said she couldn't do that, but she persisted. I mean, one of the best things about Sister Thea is her tenaciousness, whatever it was with what she wanted for herself, and as well as what she did within her own classrooms, or her own gospel, her own preaching. I mean, I loved it when I would listen to her preach, and etc., even though she wasn't supposed to. But when she came here, she just made her footing, and she, I mean, looking at the history, I mean, she was the first Black nun in the Franciscan order there in La Crosse, and that didn't always go good with everyone in that order. I mean, but she persisted, and she just was passionate about evangelizing and showing herself, and she won over a whole bunch of people as a result of that, including this young kid from La Crosse. So
when you say FSPA, just for folks who aren't familiar with our we use these initials and stuff.
Yes.
Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration,
yes,
who have their mother house in La Crosse, and so their teachers and their full habits, etc., were at Canton, Mississippi. And this young girl is enamored of them. And even coming to La Crosse on the train, if I recall the story, I mean, it was somewhat questionable whether she would be able to get on the same train as the sister who was bringing her, because she was Black, and the train, at least in Mississippi, maybe once it got further north, it could be more diverse, but that wasn't tolerated in Mississippi.
If I remember right, she had to go into a different car until they crossed the border into whatever state it was that allowed Blacks and white to sit in the same car in the mid-50s. I don't remember what that was. I remember her briefly telling me with a smirk on her face what she had experienced, and etc.
Yeah, so talk, Greg, a little bit about how she addressed that kind of those racial attitudes, behaviors.
It would be all with a smile. I mean, you would think that for decades and generations and hundreds of years that there would be, anger and etc. But she knew what she needed to do. So whether it was the bishops that she got them all to sing "We Shall Overcome," or Mike Wallace to say Black is beautiful on national TV and etc. But she was just that tenacious and that much of an advocate, for her race, but also for racial equity, and etc. And I mean, it's still happening. That was you know, it was in the 50s, it was in the early 70s, and we're still dealing with the same questions and today. So
Yeah. Now, did she, do I recall correctly that she took Viterbo students down to Mississippi, like on spring break trips
yes,
or things like that?
yes, and I was allowed to do that. My now wife, but my fiance then audited her class so we could go together.
Okay.
And we took a bus that went through Memphis and St. Louis and just further down south to Jackson and then to Canton. And several memories of that is that I was the Black students that were going back down home with us, et cetera. As soon as we got into Mississippi, I was instructed on how the rules have changed. You cannot stand next to each other. You can't touch each other, black and white. And I, you know, that didn't make any sense because I didn't understand that. I mean, at least racism in La Crosse was implicit, as not overt as it was in Mississippi. And when we got there, um, um, I went ahead and was walking down the sidewalk and had my arm around one of the Black students, and a car stopped with white kids in it and hurling just horrible statements that I had never heard before in my life as being on the other side of racism, et cetera. But then the other better part of that is she took us into her classrooms, and the kids would break into song in the middle of some didactic session, which is also unusual for elementary schools to be. We got to stay, my wife and I and another person got to stay in a home of a Black grandma who gave my wife and I a silver spoon as a wedding gift, you know, for a soon-to-be wedding. Then we went into a Black school that I remember the students said there's not been any white students that have ever been in the school. We were the first white students in there. And I understood minority then because we were surrounded by people who were interested in why would we be there, et cetera. And it was that sort of the ability to do that. But all among that, Sister Theo was making sure that we were educated and we were experiencing, you know, what it needed to be to change our lives, and she did, and it worked.
What year did you graduate, Greg, from Viterbo?
76.
But you continued to have a relationship with her, with Sister Thea?
Yes, I would write to her when I would get my master's, wrote to her when I got my doctorate, and then was going to bring her out to Seattle when I came here in '87. And so I got another letter from her that I've kept. It said, sure, she'll come out, and you need her person to with her, and et cetera. And then right after that, she got really deadly sick that she couldn't even be in a wheelchair and was in bed most of the time. But I even had the Archdiocese of Seattle, you know, prepared to support her as far as coming out, et cetera.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Oh, what a trip that would have, or visit that would have been, huh?
As a result of that, then I decided to get involved with the Archdiocese. So I was invited to be the first Caucasian to be on the Black Catholic Advisory Council for the Archbishop. And I mean, that again opened my eyes, but I was only able to do that because they knew Sister Thea of her, and that I was a student with her, and so I added on to that. But that was also another whole experience doing that.
Was that Archbishop Hunthausen at that time, or
no,
Murphy?
Murphy.
Okay.
Murphy at there. Yeah. Hunthausen.
Our friend John Hilo might have had something to do with getting you on that board, maybe.
He probably did. You know, I should have asked him that.
So you mentioned, you referred to Sister Thea's probably most public appearances a moment ago. Can you tell folks a little bit more about her appearance with Mike Wallace on 60 Minutes? Unfortunately, I have Googled that every way I can, and I cannot find it online.
I should bring that. I have a CD of it. I should bring that to Viterbo to set them play.
Tell folks what happened there. So for folks who don't remember, I mean, Mike Wallace has been deceased now for a while. Mike Wallace was well, he could get into people who didn't want to share information. He could get after them and kind of open them up. But he could also be just really very engaging with people such as Sister Thea. But she was able to give it back to him a little bit too in their encounter.
She opened him up because he wasn't, you know, he was interviewing her because of what she's contributed and being the first Black nun and you know, her evangelism and et cetera that she was doing and preaching and et cetera. She would always downplay a lot of that. You know, it's just my little bit that I'm doing and et cetera. You know, but what she did was to get him, she reversed it to have him say black is beautiful, which he refused to do, or hesitated to do, I should say, not refuse, 2, 3 times. And then she made him repeat it 3, 4 times on national TV in 1988 or whatever that was, and et cetera. So she was able to draw that out of people. And then he years later would just comment on that. That was like the first time that he was ever interviewed and had to do some things.
Or he was prodded to do something he
Yeah.
didn't. Well, I don't know that he didn't want to do it. He just didn't feel it was his place to do it, probably, you know, as a
That's probably
professional
better.
journalist or whatever.
Yeah.
But that was the thing. She wasn't going to give in and let him get away without saying it. So that was on 60 Minutes. She had already been diagnosed with cancer at that
Yes.
point. But then probably her most lingering image to most Catholics is when she preached to the U.S. bishops, and I don't know that anybody has ever preached before or since at a meeting of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Tell about that, Greg.
And she made them stand up and hold hands. All these
Yeah.
white bishops stand hand and sing "We Shall Overcome."
There
You know?
were probably 2 black bishops in the whole group.
Oh, was there?
Gregory and he was from Florida, whose name I can't remember right now, but Tallahassee maybe
Yeah.
or something. But
And you know, that was just remarkable with watching her do that, and et cetera, and getting them to participate in there. And it even seemed that some were crying. You know, I mean, it was so emotional of a task, and she did that from her wheelchair. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
so
yeah. I mean, she died in March of 1990, and that was probably their fall meeting, maybe in
Yes.
89.
yes, it was 89, I believe. And then that same group of bishops then in 2018 facilitated her canonization, you know, her moving along. So I thought that was just a great follow-up for that same group. And how many of those
Sure.
people were still there that were, you know, with listening to her. So
Sure. So she passed away in 1990 in
Yep.
Canton. So she had gone home, apparently to
she had
die.
her folks were ill. And I did meet her folks while we were there, and et cetera. I remember that. And her folks were both ill, so she decided to go back. And that's where she really, you know, pushed herself to her limits. And instead of wearing any traditional robes of a nun, she'd wear African robes.
Yeah.
And
Well, and by that point, the sisters weren't wearing habits or anything necessarily either. To give you an idea of her lingering, the legacy of Sister Thea in the Jackson diocese, I have a seminary friend who died last year. And another friend sent me an email. He was a priest of the Jackson diocese, and another friend from Jackson sent me an email and gave me the date that he had died. And he said, just 2 days after the death of Sister Thea. That's how he measured the time of Brian's death, was in proximity to hers. And he didn't know of like a connection with lacrosse or anything like that. But it speaks to how this has come from the local church. Her cause for canonization has come from the people of Jackson. And it's the Diocese of Jackson that is leading the effort. I mean, the FSPAs, the sisters are assisting it and supporting it, but it began with kind of a popular movement among the people in Jackson, as I understand it. The Diocese of Jackson.
And her famous quote at the end is, "Let me live till I die." I mean, that was such a few scattered words there that just means so much. And she did that. So.
Yeah. So how would you, I guess, what are you going to say at Viterbo, Greg? What's the main point of the message you want to convey there?
Well, what the first group I'm going to moderate is a brother who's done a whole bunch of paintings about Sister Thea, and then a songwriter who's done several masses that are based in her teaching, and then a third person who's written books for children with Sister Thea as a theme. So that'll be very interesting as far as those people who, and two of them have never met Sister Thea, but they're so inspired by that they would do that, and from different parts of the states. And then the second part will be those of us who actually had some contact with her, sharing stories and et cetera, that would show how important she was, you know. And I love one of her statements. She always wanted to do the little bit. She always downplayed what she was doing, was just a small part. But, you know, the big things come from small beginnings. And if she had small at the beginning, but at the end, and right now, years and years later, it's very big that she contributed to any of us who had some contact. So.
Well, and I think that's one of the qualities of a saintly figure, that or the reason we put forward people for beatification or canonization is that we need those people, those of us who didn't meet them. We need to meet them in other ways. And so beatification or canonization helps to keep their story kind of on the forefront, so others of us can feel that we know them, or be guided by their wisdom, their inspiration, their faithfulness, their courage. I mean, she was a woman of great courage.
Yes.
Yeah.
And of
There's
great
a
love.
book and great love.
Yeah,
There's a
great
book.
love.
There's a new book from Ave Maria Press,
Oh.
Praying 30 Days with Theo Bulman. You're seeing lots more things, you know, kind of inspired by her or telling her story. That's just something someone had given me recently. So, any final words, Greg? I'm sure you could talk forever about Sister Theo, but.
Well, Father Nutt from Xavier, it was written books on her, and with the Black Catholic Association that I did with the Archdiocese up here, I went to Indiana for the meeting of all the Black Catholics in the United States. And I was amazed at the number of people when I would say where I was from. Originally, did you know Sister Thea? And either everyone would know her or know of her or know the effect of her. And that's where I had met, you know, when she was at Xavier. I didn't really know much about it at the time, so I spent some time with them. And, you know, he wrote the Thea Bowman in her own words book.
Okay.
You know, and that's what he's written on. So, and then you asked if I had some pictures between the two of us.
Yeah.
As a youth, I didn't, but I have this great picture just of her that I'm bringing, of her just sort of lounging on a chaise lounge and, you know, being Sister Thea and et cetera. So I'm going to bring that. But
cool.
As a kid, I never figured out that I should be, you know, putting the arm
well, we
around
didn't,
her.
you know what? We didn't do that back in that day,
No,
Greg.
we
didn't have instant photos and things like we do now.
No,
I know.
So, you know, I mean, I think people should remember with anything of her that she really did love being a Catholic and love God and love people and love being a teacher, love being an evangelist, was proud that she actually preached, you know, that sort of stuff. And I think that and how she did it was including other people of all races, yet remembering how important it was to, you know, recognize being Black. And I think it was very evident with her. She wasn't trying to be anything that she wasn't, but she wanted to make sure people knew the contributions that each culture can present itself and not just one culture.
Mm-hmm. So. Authentic for sure. And I guess just to clarify the beatification, so she has been, the Diocese of Jackson has initiated this cause. And so that's a very time consuming, and this could be years that pass before she would be beatified. But it's certainly, her witness is something that we hope one day will be formally acknowledged. It's already being acknowledged. So we don't need beatification for Sister Thea to be honored and for her story to be told, etc. But it does bring a kind of a weight to that. And I think it helps to assure that it does continue to be told. I mean, even like the dedication of the Sister Thea Bulman Center at Viterbo. I mean, you could say, well, what's the point of that or whatever? Well, we want to make sure that her legacy endures, and that that when a student someday, 20 years from now says, where'd you go to college? And they say Viterbo, and they say, well, what's big about Viterbo? And they could say, well, Sister Thea Bowman graduated from Viterbo or taught at Viterbo. And then that leads someone to talk about Sister Thea Bowman. So there's, the lingering effects of things like that are important. Well, Greg, did you want to say anything else?
Well, there was one other thing that also facilitated me. I became an advocate of Father Augustus Tolton, who's the first Black priest. And I've done several talks about him at several parishes and et cetera. And that's the same thing, you know, I mean, as far as she knew that I should be doing some of that sort of stuff and facilitated me saying, what more is out there that people haven't recognized? And he's one of those amazing figures also in Catholic history, and, you know, is et cetera on there. So,
Well, maybe we can do another one of these, Greg, and talk about him.
yeah, he's an
someday.
amazing guy. So I did some talking there too. So
Sister Thea, here's a little trivia. Sister Thea does have a connection to Central Wisconsin. She had some illness that led her to spend time at the sanitarium that the Sisters of St. Joseph in Stevens Point operated.
oh,
And she spent some time at this facility called River Pines, which I know fairly well. I got to look at that again, but I just thought of that while we were talking.
no, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, and I know a sister in Stevens Point who was there at the time, and that's where she met Sister Thea, was in that situation. I'll have to look at that. I shouldn't talk about things that I don't really know about in a public setting, but oh well, no harm, no foul.
Well, growing up Catholic and growing up white and lacrosse, et cetera, and having nuns involved at FSPA, from teaching piano to getting married at Marie Angelorum and et cetera. I mean, that's always been an important part. Plus, Sister Thea, you know, being a part of that also. So, I mean, and Viterbo, was a huge part of my life and has influenced me in all my decision making thereafter, you know, years and years later. So I thank her for being in my life, and hopefully we can make sure that other people remember this completely. So
Great. Well, I want to conclude with some words. We'll let Sister Thea have the last word. How's that?
sounds good. Her prayer.
She spoke these words within the last week, so a few weeks before dying, as part of a Holy Week reflection in Canton. She shared these words. We unite ourselves with Christ's redemptive work when we reconcile, when we make peace, when we share the good news that God is in our lives, when we reflect to our brothers and sisters God's healing, God's forgiveness, God's unconditional love. We celebrate that Sister Thea did all of that so well. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Father Tom.
Have a good week, everyone.
Bye-bye.